No one could believe their eyes. Ruby Chuck Norris, the living symbol of justice, was being held at gunpoint by a young officer right in the middle of a small-town bakery. Not for any crime, only because of a prejudiced glance. In that moment, the peace of the whole town teetered on the edge of shattering. Some mornings seem perfectly ordinary, until they become turning points for an entire community. A small incident, a seemingly minor action, can be enough to reveal the true nature of justice, patience, and truth. That morning, the Texas sky was an impossibly clear blue. Gentle sunlight bathed the narrow streets of Greenville, a small town of just a few thousand people, where everyone knew each other. The Sunny Loaf Bakery at the corner opened like clockwork at 7 a.m., with the warm scent of buttered bread drifting through the cracks in the old wooden doors, stirring childhood memories in every passerby. At 84 years old, Chuck Norris stepped out of his weathered pickup truck. He wore a faded cowboy hat, a denim jacket worn thin at the shoulders, and soft leather boots. His steps were slow but steady as he made his way toward the bakery, just as he did every Saturday morning, to pick up the whole-grain loaf he pre-ordered. Everyone in Greenville knew Chuck. They loved him, not just for his legendary name from action movies long past, but for the man he was. Simple, humble, always ready to pick up a dropped hat or tie a young boy's shoelace on the street. But today, one man didn't recognize him, or pretended not to. Standing a few meters away by the traffic light was a young police officer named Bradley Knox. Just 2 years out of the police academy, Bradley had built a reputation for being sharp, hot-headed, and quick to judge. That morning, Officer Knox was patrolling Main Street. His eyes scanned the pedestrians and then stopped, zeroing in on an older man in a wide coat, a hat pulled low, cautiously approaching the bakery. Instinct, or more accurately, eagerness for glory, flared in Bradley's chest. He tightened his grip on his duty belt and strode quickly toward the bakery entrance, eyes locked on his suspicious target, who had just disappeared behind the bakery's sky-new door. Inside, the bakery was as warm and cozy as ever. Regulars sipped coffee and nibbled pastries while chatting quietly. Children giggled around the cake counter. The doorbell chimed softly as Chuck entered, prompting a warm chorus of greetings. "Good morning, Mr. Norris. Your walnut loaf is ready, sir. Want a drizzle of fresh honey today, friend?" Chuck smiled, his steel-grey eyes still gleaming beneath the brim of his hat. He returned to his seat. He nodded to each person, gently lifting the still-warm loaf that the baker girl Emily handed to him. Everything should have gone just as it had 100 times before, if not for the sound of hurried boots pounding the floor behind him. Officer Bradley stormed in, long strides carrying him straight toward Chuck. His voice rang out, tense and commanding. "Sir, stop right there. Show me your ID now." The entire bakery froze. Coffee cups are suspended mid-air. Emily stared, wide-eyed. A little boy dropped a steaming roll from his hands. Chuck turned slowly. He lifted the brim of his hat, revealing a lean but rugged face framed by wispy silver hair under the soft yellow lights. His voice, calm and deep, broke the heavy silence. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Bradley jutted his chin out, fingers twitching near his gun belt. "We received a report about a suspicious individual in the area. I'm ordering you to cooperate." Chuck frowned slightly. Around him, everyone in the bakery held their breath. No one could understand why Chuck Norris, whom they trusted and respected, was being treated like a criminal. Outside the window, the morning breeze played with the small flag posted near the bakery door. Inside, the very air seemed to grow thick and heavy. That peaceful morning had turned into a day of reckoning. The early sunlight still streamed silently across the small windows of Sunny Loaf Bakery, casting glimmers on the wooden signs swaying gently in the breeze. Inside, the warmth from the ovens still lingered in the air, mingling with the scents of flour, butter, and toasted walnuts. It all felt wrapped in a soft cocoon of peace. Until that moment. "Sir, stop right there! Show me your ID!" Officer Bradley Knox's voice cracked like a whip across the cozy bakery, hitting the warm atmosphere like a sudden, unexpected blow. Everyone inside seemed frozen. A middle-aged man dropped his cup of steaming coffee, which shattered on the old tiled floor. A little girl, about 10 years old, halfway through biting a croissant, stared wide-eyed, clutching her mother's hand tightly. Emmeline, the baker, holding a fresh buttered loaf, froze, her eyes locked onto the unfolding scene. Chuck Norris turned fully now, his calm gaze meeting the young officer's tense approach. His hands relaxed by his sides, his old weathered cowboy hat tipped back to reveal a kind but rugged face. "Good morning, officer," Chuck said again, his voice a deep, steady current slicing through the rising tension. "Is there something wrong?" Bradley stepped closer, now barely a full arm's length away. He didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning Chuck from head to toe as if hunting for some invisible wrong. His right hand hovered near his holster, ready to draw his weapon at the slightest provocation. "We have a report about a suspicious individual," Bradley said, his voice even, but his eyes sharp and wary. "I'm ordering you to cooperate. Show me your ID immediately." A faint murmur stirred from a corner of the bakery, quickly silenced as everyone held their breath. Chuck nodded gently. Moving slowly and deliberately, as if to show he had nothing to hide, he reached into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a worn leather wallet, opened it, and pulled out an aged driver's license. The card read Charles David Norris, alongside a familiar portrait, stern eyes, silver hair, a soft, enduring smile. "Here," Chuck said, offering the license. Bradley didn't reach for it immediately. He squinted, glancing at the ID and then back at Chuck's face, suspicion still clouding his features. Step back from me," Bradley ordered, taking half a step backward, his hand tight on his holstered gun. "Entrez," put the license on the counter, stepped back 2 paces. The air inside the bakery grew suffocating. An elderly man near the window shook his head and sighed. In the far corner, a group of college students subtly raised their phones, fingers quickly gliding across the screens. Chuck remained calm. He placed the driver's license gently on the polished wooden counter and stepped back exactly 2 paces, hands open in front of him. "Patient." "Very good," Bradley muttered, stepping forward to pick up the card, never once taking his eyes off Chuck. He scanned the name quickly, frowning, then looked up at the face before him. "Chuck Norris," he mumbled, the name sparking something faint in his young mind. A dry chuckle rang out from the back. It was Sam, the owner of the hardware store next door and an old friend of Chuck's. "If you don't know who Chuck Norris is, you must have just moved to town yesterday," Sam said acidly. Bradley flushed red, but kept his voice stiff. "We do not discriminate. Everyone must comply with the procedure." Chuck nodded mildly, his tone patient, even kind. "I understand, officer. I respect the law, but I'm just here to pick up my breakfast loaf." A long silence settled over the room. Then, shattering the stillness, Bradley barked loudly. "Get down, hands behind your head." The bakery exploded into gasps. "Why?" Emily cried out, the bread slipping from her fingers. This can't be happening." An elderly woman stammered, tears welling in her eyes. Chuck furrowed his brow but didn't lash out. He took a slow, deep breath, locking eyes with the young officer. "Officer, I don't understand," Chuck said, his voice steady. "I'm standing here among my neighbors. I'm unarmed. I am no threat to anyone." But Bradley wasn't listening. In his eyes there was only rigid stubbornness, a dangerous kind born from wounded pride. "Get on the ground. This is your final warning," Bradley barked, drawing his gun fully now, its cold barrel pointed directly at Chuck. The metallic click of the weapon being cocked echoed through the bakery. Several customers stumbled backward, chairs clattering across the old tiled floor. Emily, pale and shaking, instinctively pulled out her phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. Chuck stared down the barrel of the gun. He had faced hundreds of dangerous moments in his life, on movie sets, in martial arts arenas, and in real life. But this was something he had never imagined. Being held at gunpoint in his own hometown by someone sworn to protect him. He slowly bent one knee, kneeling on the bakery's wooden floor. His calloused hands that had saved lives both on screen and off, quietly interlocked behind his head. The scene was heartbreaking. Through the bakery's glass windows, morning sunlight still bathed the little town in gold. But inside, it felt like the sun had vanished. The Sunny Loaf Bakery sank into a deathly silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of a few terrified patrons and the scraping of wooden chairs across the old floorboards. The wall clock ticked, each second slicing deeper into the growing unease in the room. Emily, the young baker, stood trembling, tears brimming in her wide eyes. She had grown up admiring Chuck Norris, not just the movie star but the real-life hero, always ready to lend a hand to anyone in need. And now, the man she admired was kneeling on the cold, dusty floor, hands behind his head, a gun pointed at him. All because he came to buy a loaf of bread. "Please," Emily sobbed, her voice cracking as she stepped forward. "Please lower your weapon. This is Mr. Norris. He hasn't done anything wrong." Bradley remained rigid, his gun unwavering. Inside his mind, the rigid protocols from the police academy screamed. Suspicious subject. Control the situation. Eliminate the threat. An older man, Mr. Jones, owner of the bookstall down the street, stepped forward with his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Officer," he said, his voice steady but pleading, "you're making a mistake. Chuck Norris is no threat. This is his home. It's our home, too." Bradley snapped, his voice tight. "Sir, step back. Do not interfere with police operations." The atmosphere in the bakery grew heavier, denser. Some younger customers, pale and shaky, quietly raised their phones, recording everything. Red LED lights blinked from phone cameras. Silent, undeniable witnesses. A frail old woman shuffled forward, leaning heavily on a cane. Her white hair shimmered under the bakery's soft lights, but her eyes burned with courage. "Years ago, Chuck Norris saved my grandson from drowning," she rasped. Measy muttered. "He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't ask for anything." He pointed a trembling finger directly at Bradley. "And now you're pointing a gun at the man this town trusts most." Bradley hesitated. His mind roared with conflicting instincts, enforce, control, and yet the reality before him cracked his rigid armor. Outside the bakery, a curious crowd had gathered, peering through the windows, murmuring in confusion and anger. The mood had shifted from shock to collective outrage. At that moment, the bakery owner burst through the back door. A short, stocky man with a bald head and a thick white beard, Bob had lived in Greenville for 40 years. Seeing the scene unfold, Bob's blood boiled. "What the hell is going on here, Officer Knox?" he thundered, fearlessly marching forward. "Mr. Norris is one of my oldest customers. He's never caused any trouble, not once." Bradley turned, tense. "I am performing my duty. This individual was acting suspiciously and I have full authority to detain him." Bob shook his head, fists clenched at his sides. "Suspicious?" He pointed at Chuck, still kneeling. "Did you see him threaten anyone? Did he act violently? Or was he just buying his bread like he's done for decades?" Bradley faltered. "Was moving cautiously wearing a wide coat, acting strange. A scoffing laugh rose from the back. A group of college students, recording everything, now stood openly, their cameras pointed squarely at Bradley. "Enough," Bob growled. He turned to Emily. "Pull up the security footage." Emily nodded urgently and dashed to the back office. Less than a minute later she reappeared, clutching a tablet in her shaking hands. On the screen, the footage showed Chuck entering the bakery. He smiled warmly, greeted people, accepted his bread and thanked the staff. No suspicious movements. No threats. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a kind, elderly man picking up his breakfast. The bakery was silent for a beat. Then the murmurs started, building into a wave. "See? He was just buying bread. Let him go." A tall young man in a baseball cap strode forward, pointing directly at Bradley. "You're embarrassing our whole town. Let Chuck go." Bradley's face turned pale. He fumbled for his radio, his voice cracking as he called dispatch. "Requesting backup. Suspect in custody. Crowd forming." A cold voice came back over the radio. "Officer Knox, confirm. Is the suspect Chuck Norris?" Bradley swallowed hard. "Yes." The dispatcher's tone turned firm. "No nonsense. Lower your weapon. Stand down immediately. Await further instructions." The turning point had come. Bradley hesitated. His hands trembled. The entire bakery watched, breathless. Chuck Norris, still kneeling, lifted his head. His voice, calm, deep, unwavering, filled the room. "Officer, don't let one mistake become a tragedy." Bradley's eyes darted around the room. The weight of 100 stares bore down on him. Slowly, painfully, Bradley lowered his weapon. The gun slid back into its holster, heavy as a stone. Without a word, Bradley turned and fled the bakery, disappearing into the golden Texas morning. The bakery erupted. An elderly woman sobbed openly. Emily tossed aside her tablet and ran to Chuck, helping him to his feet. The townsfolk surged forward, surrounding Chuck protectively. Bob grasped Chuck's hand tightly. "We're sorry, Mr. Norris. This should never have happened." Chuck, a man who had faced the fiercest forces in both movies and real life, simply offered a weary smile. He brushed the dust from his jeans, clapped Bob on the shoulder, and said, "It's not your fault, but it's a lesson for all of us." The Sunny Loaf Bakery, once filled with the scent of buttered bread and quiet conversation, had now become the silent epicenter of a storm brewing far beyond its walls. A single question now hung heavily in the minds of all who witnessed it. Why had Chuck Norris, the town's very symbol of integrity, been forced to kneel beneath the barrel of a gun in his own hometown? That afternoon, as the golden light of Texas stretched long across the rooftops of old Greenville, the townspeople began to gather outside Sunny Loaf Bakery. At first, it was just a few of Chuck's longtime friends. Zan, the hardware store owner. Mrs. Helen, who had once been rescued by Chuck during the flood of '89. Mike and Sarah, the young couple running the organic farm on the outskirts. They stood silently. No slogans. No banners. Only solemn eyes gazing at the bakery's front door. The same door where, that very morning, Chuck Norris had been made to kneel in shame. But word spread like wildfire. The video clips shot inside the bakery circulated rapidly, first on Greenville's small Facebook groups, then onto bigger pages across Texas. In just a few hours, there were over 10,000 shares. A simple hashtag emerged, handwritten on scraps of cardboard. Justice for Chuck. As dusk deepened into nightfall, the crowd swelled. People brought hand-painted signs. "No place for abuse of power in Greenville. We stand with Chuck. And injustice to one is an injustice to all." Families came. Veterans, school teachers, Students, neighbors who had known Chuck for decades, and strangers who had only heard his name whispered with reverence. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit by the soft glow of the bakery's windows. At one corner, a small band of young musicians set up, playing slow, soulful country tunes, songs of unity and resilience carried softly over the murmuring crowd. At around 8 p.m., under the golden haze of streetlights and the first stars blinking into the indigo sky, Chuck Norris appeared. He wasn't in a fancy car. He wasn't flanked by cameras. He walked, slowly, deliberately, wearing his faded denim jacket, dusty cowboy boots, and that battered old hat. His face wasn't angry. It wasn't proud. It was steady. The face of a man who had seen too much to be surprised anymore, but who still chose hope. The crowd instinctively parted to make way. A little girl, no more than 6, stepped shyly forward and offered Chuck a bundle of wildflowers. He knelt slightly, accepted them with a gentle smile, and tousled her hair. Chuck stepped up onto the wooden bakery steps, the same steps where, only hours earlier, he had been humiliated. And the crowd went silent. A reverent, aching silence. Chuck took off his hat and placed it over his heart. Then he spoke, his voice deep, calm, but ringing clearly into the night. Greenville, I have called this town my home for over 30 years, and I know this much. Home is a place where you are respected. Home is where justice is cherished. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. Tonight, I am not speaking for myself. I speak for everyone who has ever been judged too quickly. Everyone who has been misunderstood because of how they looked or what they wore or the color of their skin. His voice grew firmer. We cannot let prejudice rule our hearts. Not today. Not ever. Applause broke out like a thunderclap. The crowd roared. Cheer. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. An elderly woman dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. A group of teenagers raised a banner high. No justice for one, no justice for all. Local reporter Rebecca Lane, streaming live, caught every moment, and within minutes tens of thousands were watching. The story of Greenville was no longer just a small town affair. It had become a national cry for decency and humanity. The next morning, as mist still clung to the faded rooftops of Greenville, the town gathered at the municipal hall for an emergency meeting. It seemed as if every soul in Greenville had turned up. The hall was packed shoulder to shoulder, farmers in denim overalls, teachers with worried faces, teenagers with determined eyes, veterans in weathered caps. The room buzzed with tension, not anger, but a deep, unspoken expectation. We want answers. We want change. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy doors swung open. Police Chief Mason entered. An older man in his 60s, with thinning silver hair and a slow, deliberate gait, but eyes sharp as broken glass. He didn't walk to the podium. He didn't hide behind a microphone. Instead, he stepped down onto the floor, only a few feet from the gathered townspeople, close enough to see the lines of worry etched into their faces. When he spoke, his voice was rough, worn from years of command, but steady. First, Mason began, on behalf of the Greenville Police Department, I offer my sincerest apology to Mr. Chuck Norris. A hush fell over the crowd. Some raised their phones, filming every word. What happened yesterday does not represent the values of Greenville. It does not represent the oath every officer here takes to serve and protect without prejudice. He let those words hang in the air, heavy and raw. I am not here to make excuses. Officer Bradley Knox has been immediately suspended pending a full internal investigation. We pledge complete transparency with our findings. And more importantly, we pledge to listen. Chief Mason's eyes scanned the crowd, finally resting on Chuck Norris, standing quietly near the back of the room. "I know," Mason continued, voice lowering slightly. "No apology can erase the hurt that was caused. But I hope this can be the beginning of real change." The hall was silent. All eyes turned to Chuck. Chuck walked forward slowly. No hurry, no drama. Just steady, heavy steps across the worn floor. He stopped a few feet from Chief Mason, removed his cowboy hat and placed it respectfully over his heart. Chuck's voice, deep, calm, unwavering, filled the room. "Forgiveness is not hard. It's change that's hard." He turned to address the entire crowd. "Greenville, our town deserves better. Not more laws, no more punishments, but more kindness, more courage, more humanity." For a long moment, no one moved. A tentative clap, then another. Then the hall erupted in a thunder of applause, so loud it rattled the old windows in their frames. Chuck's words had lit a fire, not of anger, but of resolve. A firm, steadfast resolve that Greenwood would not allow itself to be dragged down by fear or division. That very afternoon, out in the town hall lobby, a group of young people unrolled massive white sheets across a long table. Inside the box, full letters, "Petition for police reform, for a better Greenville." People lined up naturally, without anyone urging them. Old men leaning on canes. Mothers are balancing toddlers on their hips. Teenagers with baseball caps and worn backpacks. One by one they signed their names. Not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of hope. "I am determined that Greenville will be better for everyone." Chuck also approached the table. He didn't rush. He didn't make a show of it. He simply picked up the pen and signed at the top corner, his handwriting steady and sure. As he finished, the room spontaneously burst into applause again. No chants, no slogans, just the sound of hands clapping. A simple, powerful promise. We will change the right way. In the days that followed, Greenville changed faster than anyone could have imagined. Politic meetings sprang up across town. At the library, at the school gym, even at the town's old movie theater. Neighbors who had never exchanged more than polite hellos now sat side by side, passionately debating what needed to change, how to make Greenville stronger, fairer, and more united. Survey sheets about police conduct were distributed door to door. A new section on the town's website was launched. Community Voices. A public forum for citizens to share concerns and feedback directly with city officials. Change was no longer a vague dream. It was being built, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. And yeah, beneath it all, Chuck felt a quiet, persistent unease. A ripple beneath the surface of their victory. One late afternoon, as Chuck strolled through the town square, the same square that had once hosted angry rallies, a young security guard came running up to him. It was Cody, the wide-eyed kid who had witnessed everything inside the bakery that day. Panting, face flushed from rushing, Cody blurted out, "Mr. Norris, I think I remember something." Chuck stopped immediately, his eyes narrowing with focus. "Tell me, son," he said. Cody glanced around nervously, lowering his voice. "Before Officer Bradley stormed into the bakery, I saw him talking to a man in a grey suit, carrying a black briefcase. Didn't look like anyone from around here." Chuck's expression hardened. "A grey suit? You're sure?" Cody nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. I thought he was just a tourist at first, but now, I'm not so sure." Chuck's mind raced. A sharp-dressed man carrying a briefcase. Not a common sight in down-to-earth Greenville, where boots and denim ruled. He didn't say much to Cody. He simply patted the boy's shoulder and said, "Good job remembering, son. You stay safe, all right? But inside, Chuck's instincts were already burning. Something much bigger was at play. Chuck didn't call for a meeting. He didn't alert the press. He did what he always did best. He moved quietly. He began retracing steps, visiting the local businesses near Sunny Loaf Bakery. At the auto repair shop, old man Sam scratched his beard and said, "Yeah, there was a fancy black SUV parked out front that morning. We didn't recognize the plates. Definitely not from around here." At the diner, a waitress remembered. A tall man in a grey suit. Kept checking his watch. Talked to a cop outside just before everything went crazy. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Soon a few old friends who still had connections in the county records office, Chuck got the full picture. The SUV belonged to a Dallas-based law firm, a firm notorious for handling dirty real estate deals. Their latest client? A massive development company is aiming to buy out Greenville's historic downtown properties. Their goal? To transform the sleepy, beloved town into a luxury resort destination. But first, they needed to drive property prices down. They needed to ruin Greenville's reputation, to make people desperate enough to sell. And what better way than to stage a public scandal? A police officer pulling a gun on a beloved figure like Chuck Norris. Captured on camera. Spread across social media. Tarnishing the town's image overnight. Officer Bradley wasn't the mastermind. He was a pawn. Manipulated, nudged, set up for a disastrous mistake. The real enemy was far more insidious. Faced with the truth, Chuck knew he had a choice. He could expose it all, igniting a firestorm that would destroy the development company, but also risk dragging Greenville through more division and pain. Or he could find another way, a harder way, the right way. That night, sitting alone by the fireplace, Chuck made his decision. He would fight back, not with anger, not with lawsuits, not with fists, but with the quiet, stubborn power of decency. He called together his trusted friends. Bob the baker, Emily the young baker girl, Sam the mechanic, Mike and Sarah the farmers, and Mrs. Helen the retired teacher. Each brought their own strength to the table. Bob knew every long-time property owner in town. Mike and Sarah had strong ties to the farming community. Listeners at home who actually could rally the young people. Sam had contacts in local journalism. Chuck laid out his plan simply. We will fight their corruption with rage. We'll outshine it with the best of who we are. And so began the most extraordinary project Greenville had ever seen. In just 2 weeks, volunteers repaired crumbling homes and shops. Farmers expanded the town market, showcasing organic produce and homegrown goods. Artists painted vibrant murals, celebrating Greenville's rich history. Schools launched the Kindness Days campaign to teach children about compassion and integrity. Greenville didn't just heal, it blossomed. Meanwhile, Sam quietly handed a thick folder of evidence to a trusted journalist from Dallas. Not framed as an explosive scandal, but it is a story of how one small town chose hope over hate. Within 3 days, the first headline appeared. When kindness defeats greed, the unbreakable spirit of Greenville. And just like that, the development company's scheme collapsed under public scrutiny. No one wanted to invest in a project associated with crushing a good, honest town. The investors fled. The lawyers vanished. And Greenville remained whole, bruised, wiser, but unbroken. Not a single punch thrown. Not a single lawsuit filed. Just quiet, stubborn goodness winning the day. One evening, as the Texas sun dipped low, bleeding gold and crimson across the wide plains, Chuck sat alone on a sturdy wooden bench in the town square. He nursed a steaming cup of coffee from the sunny loaf, his hat tilted back slightly, his eyes distant, watching the last of the day's light flicker across the fields. The town was quiet now. Greenville had found its heartbeat again, slower, steadier, but stronger. And yet Chuck knew some wounds still needed tending. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a familiar figure approaching hesitantly. It was Bradley Knox. The young officer looked different now. Gone was the puffed-up bravado, the rigid shoulders. Instead, he walked with his head low, hat clutched tightly in his trembling hands, the weight of his mistake written in every line of his posture. Bradley stopped a few feet away, shuffling awkwardly like a boy about to face the principal's office. Finally he spoke, voice raw and cracking. "Mr. Norris, I don't know how to begin to apologize." Chuck looked at him for a long moment, then slowly set his coffee down. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply gestured to the empty space beside him on the bench. "Have a seat, son," Chuck said, his voice even, neither cold nor warm, simply open. Bradley hesitated, then sank down onto the bench, his hands fidgeting nervously in his lap. For a moment, neither man spoke. The only sound was the whisper of the evening breeze and the far-off laughter of children playing in the park. "Finally," Bradley said, almost whispering, "I resigned from the police force." He swallowed hard. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I want to do something right for once. Start over." Chuck turned his head, studying the young man carefully, not with judgment, but with the hard-earned patience of someone who had seen the world chew people up and spit them out. "You know," Chuck said slowly, "being brave doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means facing them, owning them, and choosing to be better." Bradley's eyes glistened. He blinked hard, nodding fiercely. "I want to be better, sir. I want to help, even if it's just in small ways." Chuck smiled, a small, weary, but real smile. He reached out and patted Bradley's shoulder, his hand firm but kind. "Good," Chuck said. "Start where you are. Start small. Make yourself useful. The rest will follow." Bradley straightened up a little, like someone feeling, maybe for the first time, that redemption was possible. "I've already signed up," Bradley said shyly, "to volunteer for the children's self-defense program at the community center. I'll teach them how to stay safe, how to stand tall." Chuck's smile deepened, a warmth in his chest that no gun or hatred could ever touch. "That's a good place to start," he said simply. "The world doesn't need more warriors. It needs more guardians." Bradley stood, a little taller now, still wiping his eyes roughly with the sleeve of his jacket. "Thank you, Mr. Norris. I won't let you down again." Chuck tipped his hat in acknowledgement. "You're not doing it for me, son. You're doing it for yourself. And for every kid who deserves a better world than the one we were given." As Bradley walked away, Chuck watched him go, not with pity, not with suspicion, but with the hard-earned hope of a man who knew that sometimes even broken things can be made whole again. That night, under a sky littered with 1,000,000 silent stars, the people of Greenville gathered once again, not in anger, not in protest, but in unity. There were no megaphones, no banners, no fiery speeches, only a sea of small trembling flames, one candle in the hand of every man, woman and child. They met in the town's central park, beneath the ancient oak tree that had stood longer than anyone could remember, a silent witness to all the joy, sorrow, mistakes and miracles that had shaped Greenville. Chuck Norris stood among them. No grandstand, no spotlight. He held a simple candle, its little flame flickering in the breeze. In his left hand, he held the hand of an elderly man, a veteran who had seen too much war. In his right hand, He held the small, calloused hand of a little boy, barely tall enough to reach his waist. No one spoke for a long time. The only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional sniffle from the crowd. Then, in the stillness, a child's voice rose. Small, uncertain, but pure. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Others picked it up, hesitantly at first, then strongly. Mothers and fathers, students and teachers, old soldiers and young dreamers. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Their voices wove together into one thread of hope. Fragile, beautiful, unbreakable. Chuck closed his eyes. He could feel it. The town's wounds are starting to knit together, not by force, not by pride, but by something far older and stronger. Kindness, forgiveness, resolve. He thought of all the battles he'd fought in his life. On the screens, in tournaments, in his own soul. And he knew, with every fiber of his being, this simple, stubborn love was the greatest victory of all. Somewhere in the dark, someone whispered a prayer for a better Greenville, for a kinder world. Chuck smiled softly, his candle burning steadily despite the breeze. And as he looked around, at the faces glowing gold in the night, at the children cradling their tiny lights like treasures, he felt a fierce, quiet certainty rise within him. We're going to be all right. Later that night, after the candles had burned low and the crowd had drifted home, Chuck Norris sat alone on his front porch. The old wooden swing creaked gently beneath him. The stars sprawled overhead, endless and unblinking. A faint breeze stirred the fields beyond the town, carrying the scent of cotton and fresh-turned earth. Chuck nursed a warm mug of coffee between his calloused hands. His boots tapped idly against the porch boards. And for the first time in many long months he felt, not relief exactly, but something quieter, deeper. Pride. The screen door creaked open behind him. Tiny footsteps pattered across the porch. It was Emily's niece, a little girl no more than 8 years old, wearing an oversized sweatshirt that swallowed her small frame. She climbed up beside Chuck, her legs dangling above the floorboards. For a long while they said nothing. They just sat there, breathing in the night. Finally, the girl spoke, her voice small but certain. "Uncle Chuck, were you scared?" Chuck turned his head slightly, studying her solemn little face in the starlight. He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he took a slow sip of his coffee, then said quietly, "I was." The girl frowned, confused. "But you're Chuck Norris. You're not supposed to be scared." Chuck smiled, a real smile this time, deep and full of life. He reached out and ruffled her hair gently. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, sweetheart," he said, his voice soft as the breeze. "Fear of elements. Being brave means you move forward anyway, even when your knees are shaking, even when your heart's pounding, even when the world feels too heavy to carry." The girl leaned against his side, warm and trusting. After a long pause, she asked, "Will everything stay good now?" Chuck looked out over the sleeping town, the old gas station, the weathered barns, the rows of small houses with lights twinkling in a few windows. And he answered honestly, "No, honey, not always. Bad things will still happen. People will still make mistakes. Hearts will still get broken sometimes." He glanced down at her, smiling gently. "But if enough of us keep choosing kindness, keep choosing courage, keep choosing to believe the best in each other, then the bad stuff won't. Not ever." The little girl nodded solemnly, as if tucking those words deep inside her. They sat there a while longer, saying nothing, just listening to the crickets and the soft whisper of the cotton fields beyond. When she finally dozed off, her head resting against Chuck's side, he finished the last sip of his coffee, set the mug down, and looked up at the stars one more time. In the vast, ancient sky, the stars seemed to pulse like tiny heartbeats, small, steady promises that darkness could never swallow the light completely. Chuck closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool night air, and he whispered, so softly that only the stars could hear, "Hold the light. Hold the line. Hold your heart." Then he leaned back in the creaky swing and let the night carry him and all of Greenville into a quieter, stronger tomorrow. End.